Hi, I'm G.T. Bynum, City Councilor for District 9. I'm here with someone I've known for a few years. One of my constituents, former Mayor Robert J. LaFortune, who was Mayor of Tulsa from 1970 to 78 and also served more terms in office at City Hall than anyone in the city's history. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, GT. And of course, I'm very proud to be GT's grandfather. And I was his campaign manager now for 2 of his campaigns, and we've been very successful, and he's served very well in his first 2 years as a counselor. So I'm honored to be a part of this interview.
Great. Well, just to start out, you grew up here in Tulsa. Can you talk a bit about that?
Well, I was born in Tulsa in 1927, the first year after St. John Hospital was opened, and my parents moved here in 1920 from South Bend, Indiana. So our family's been well established in Tulsa now for almost 90 years.
And you grew up here, and then you went to Purdue University?
Yes, I went to local schools, parochial school, Marquette, and then Cassia Hall for high school. And then around the time of World War II, I was in and out of school and in and out of the service, and finally attended Purdue for my degree in chemical engineering in 1951.
Okay. And then you moved back here to Tulsa and went into the oil business?
Yes, well, I got married in 1951 and took a job. I had two different jobs, kind of based on my engineering background, and one of them was for about 5 years as a sales engineer for a chemical company based in Indianapolis, Indiana. And then when I left that company, I went into partnership in the drilling business with a neighborhood friend of mine, Bob Reed. And so for about 10 years we operated a drilling company. We had up to as many as 6 rigs working in central Oklahoma. These were rigs that were mainly on wells from 2,500 down to 6,000 feet deep, but all in Oklahoma.
Okay.
Then in the early 60s, the drilling business got very soft, and while we were doing all right with regard to finding production, trying to use profitably use our rigs was not didn't seem to be very prudent. So the drilling company dissolved. I took the production. My partner took the rigs or the iron, and so I, in a sense, just kind of went into a semi-retirement for a year or two. And that's when I was induced to run for office.
And how did that come about?
Well, I'd been just lightly involved in some local campaigns, like Henry Bellman's and Dewey Bartlett's, and so I had some of my friends approach me to actually run for mayor in 1963, and I felt like I was really not too interested in that particular job at that time. They said, well, since you've got this engineering background, why don't you think about the Commissioner of Streets and Public Property, which is essentially over the public works areas of the city, and utilize your engineering background in that way. And it would make perhaps an attractive reason for people to vote for you. So I succumbed to that suggestion and was successful in beating an incumbent, Guy Hall, who'd been in office 6 or 8 years, and frankly had been a very good commissioner. But I guess the wave was on, so to speak. Republicans were kind of coming back. Dean Langenheim, who was the Water and Sewer Commissioner and the retired dean of the engineering school at Tulsa University, had been in office a couple of years, and so I joined him as the second Republican on the commission in 1964. And later on in '66, of course, Jim Hughley won as mayor, so the Republicans then had control of the of City Hall for the first time in many years. All of us served coming on with Jim Maxwell, who had been the mayor during the late 50s and early 60s. A very fine mayor, too, I might add. But at least the Republican Party seemed to be having some more effectiveness getting candidates elected. And about that time, Henry Bellman was elected a governor. And Dewey Bartlett had been elected from Tulsa as a state senator, and later on as a governor. So at any rate, it was kind of an exciting time for the party from the standpoint of Republican politics.
What were the big issues when you got elected to the street commission that you saw? What were the things you wanted to work on in that position?
Well, in 1958, the national government, the federal government, had approved the interstate highway system. And they were providing 90% funding for interstate highways. So the designated interstate highway for Tulsa was what we know today as I-44. That is from Oklahoma City up to Joplin. And so there were some opportunities for Tulsa to begin to build freeways. But in 1958, the city developed a master expressway plan, very, very detailed down to the very block of where the streets and the on-ramps and off-ramps and the various interchanges and whatnot would occur. And they had also had the county and the city joined in some bond issues and started funding right-of-way monies to protect these various freeways and expressways. And the different funding was involved, however. I mentioned interstate highways were 90%, but the other highways were only 50%. So it took a lot of local money for the city or the county to participate in those. So, but when I was elected a street commissioner in 1964, the expressway program was probably the primary objective of your being in office. There were obviously other issues that came along. I can tell you about one that was to me very interesting because I think it helped me mature very early as an elected official, and that had to do with public accommodations. That is, the rights for minorities and African Americans in particular to be able to access restaurants and motels and hotels and just the areas that the normal public was very accustomed to using. You have to remember we had Jim Crow laws in Oklahoma going back into the 1920s, and these prohibited blacks from accessing many of the normal things that we just take for granted today that are accessible to our citizens. And so within the first month that I was as a commissioner, we had on our agenda to consider and approve a public accommodations ordinance that would guarantee African Americans and other minorities access to what are considered normally public accommodations, restaurants, cafeterias, hotels, motels. So that was the hot button issue for the commission in the first month I was in office. And my own assessment of that was I hadn't really given it much thought when I first was elected. So that's why I say it helped me mature as a elected official, because I came to realize very quickly that here was a right that was entitled really to every citizen's that was not available to our citizens here in Tulsa. So I spoke up very quickly in favor of this ordinance, and fortunately it passed. We had demonstrations by people who objected to it. It's kind of disgusting in a way that people were so backward in their thinking. Mm-hmm. But that's the way it was in the early 60s, mm-hmm. because Oklahoma and Tulsa were just coming out of all of this segregation, these segregation policies that they had.
One thing that you worked on as street commissioner, I believe, was the move to the new City Hall building and the construction of that building.
Yeah, that's an interesting issue, because through the years, the downtown planners had worked on various downtown master plans, and a civic center complex was envisioned, and actually was envisioned back in almost in the late 20s, as I understand it. But in the late 50s, they developed a civic center plan that affected all of the property west of Denver and between the 3rd Street and 7th Street. And earlier, before my time as an elected official, the county courthouse had been built in the 50s at 6th and Denver, and in the late 50s there was a bond issue passed that built what was called the Assembly Center, which is today's convention center, and had plans in the master plan for a new city hall and a police courts building. So in 1964, Jim Maxwell and our commission put on up as a bond issue a new city hall and a new police courts building, as well as a city hall meeting room, which were in place until recent history. Mm-hmm. And so in 1965 we had a kind of a hard fight on this as a bond issue because there were certain interests that felt like these new buildings, this new investment, so to speak, in public buildings ought to be put in the main downtown and not off to the west as they were proposed. But we were very successful in that bond issue. So the new City Hall was authorized in 1965, as well as the police courts building, which is still in use today. And so we got the funds to build the building, and it was, as I recall, it was designed to be suitable for the city's size and operation for 20 years, that is until 1985. And of course, after 85, it would begin to outgrow itself.
How did working as a street commissioner prepare you for the job of mayor?
Well, I don't think there's any job that involved a commission post that was as broad in its scope as far as learning the functions of the city. We were involved in codes and the maintenance of buildings, of course the engineering and design of things like the streets and bridges. The port of Tulsa at Catoosa, for instance, was built in the 60s, and my office had the responsibility to purchase the land, some 2,500 acres of land that serves as the port site today. And I had a budget of less than $1 million to buy 2,500 acres of land. And we ended up, as an office, acquiring that property for under $1,000 an acre.
Wow.
And so that completed the site acquisition for the port. The port was opened, of course, in 1971 and began immediately to be a very successful industrial function for the city. It has never required any subsidy from our city or from Rogers County, who are the co-partners with us in that, to operate it. It's operated on the funds that it has generated by its operation.
What drew you to run for mayor in 1970?
Well, it was a lot easier decision then than I was confronted with in 1963. First of all, I felt like I had a good deal of knowledge about the city operation. I had a lot of confidence in what I thought the city needed to be doing, and of course, obviously, I had good electoral support in all of the elections that I had. So it was pretty easy having the chance to succeed Jim Hughley, who I'd worked with very closely and who had been very supportive of the things that I wanted to do as a commissioner.
When you came in office, as mayor, what were the things that you really wanted to accomplish and work on?
Well, we had a lot of expressway issues that were front and center at that time. And remember, this was 1970. Fortunately, the port was just being finished, which had been a decades-long effort of the city and Rogers County to complete. There was some studies being done to build a new theater for Tulsa. That was a very high priority among the citizen groups when we'd meet and talk about long-term objectives. And I perceived also that we had really slipped in our maintenance of parks and putting money aside to develop new parks. We had a dearth of parks in the city. And a lot of the new development that had gone on, that is through subdivisions and whatnot, were being put in without any allocation of public monies toward serving those areas with parks. So that was one of the highlights of my first race. Also, we were beginning to face the issue of the form of city government that we had. And so there was some thinking about putting up a different form of government for a vote. And there was a lot of interest in it from our Chamber of Commerce and from the, I'm going to say, the more active citizen groups around Tulsa in perhaps testing the voters on a new form of government.
And you did bring that up in 1973, I believe.
Yes, we did. And it was a council form, a little different than we have today. I think we had an 11-member council, and we had something that is talked about today as a change in our present form, and that is to have at-large council members. We proposed, I think, 11 council members with 6 being from districts and 5 being at large. And however, we had 2 papers that were had contrasting views on this form of government. The Tulsa Tribune favored the change to a council, strong mayor council form. The Tulsa World opposed it, and we got into a very strong arguments, pro and con, about changing our form of government at all. And the final product was a pretty negative vote. I think our vote was probably not more than about 35% positive.
Oh, and I know the Tribune article I read when you left office said that was probably the biggest defeat of your administration, but probably the biggest victory was the increase in sales tax, the second penny, if you will.
Yes, the second penny came on as a result mainly of not being able to adequately fund our capital needs for the city. police cars and trucks for the street department, just the rolling equipment, so to speak. And so the third penny sales tax was approved. I mean, the second penny sales tax was approved and allocated to capital. So that was a big item. And the other thing that we pursued a lot was the study of the new theater.
Well, and talk about that a bit, the PAC.
Yeah, that was a very fortunate turn for Tulsa that came about because of the efforts of John Williams, who was then chairman of the Williams Company, probably the largest and most important private enterprise in Tulsa at the time. John was planning the Williams Center complex that's there today, mainly through the Bank of Oklahoma Tower and the green park-like area that sits on the south side of that. And they approached the city to take over a urban renewal project that we had in downtown Tulsa. This project comprised 9 city blocks. That is from 1st Street up to 3rd, and then from Cincinnati to Cheyenne. And the Williams companies backed this urban renewal project, which would build the BOK Tower, the Williams Tower, and within the confines of that complex, John Williams and Joe, his nephew, saw the opportunity of building a new performing arts center for Tulsa. And so John approached Lita Chapman, who is the wife of James Chapman, certainly one of the wealthiest Tulsans in our history, and very charitable people also. And Lita Chapman agreed to a $3.5 million lead gift toward a $7 million private fundraising project that John would undertake. With the $7 million as his objective, he then approached the city to put up $7 million in bond funds. And with the $14 million that was then available, that would build a new theater. So, of course, I thought that was a great opportunity for Tulsa to have the leverage of $7 million private to our $7 million public. And so we put that to a bond issue, and where before the theater had been a very negative issue for bond approval, this time it was approved within the mid-60s, I think, percentage approval. So then we had $14 million of available money. We designed the building. Yamasaki, who is a world-famous architect from Detroit and who had designed the World Trade Center towers, he designed the BOK Tower and the rest, and the theater, and the Williams Center complex. So, however, when we went out to bids on the theater, the bids came in at about $18 million. So we only had 14. So obviously we had to go back to the drawing board and drop some of the items out of the design, and also go back and raise more money. So John raised an additional $2 million, and the city put up an additional $2 million through revenue sharing funds that were then available through the Nixon administration. And so then we had $18 million available, and we were able to build the building for that money, and actually had $1 million of surplus that has served our programming needs through the Performing Arts Center Trust now for many years.
Well, you served, was it 16 years at City Hall?
14.
14 altogether.
Right.
And I know the Tribune, at the time you decided not to run again, said you almost certainly could have had another term. So why did you decide to to hang it up?
Well, I told some people at the time, I said, well, it seems to me like the problems of the city have a way of simply recycling. Funding problems come up and you solve that, and then in another few years they're back again. Or the needs of the city, of course, shift from one thing to another. It might be a theater in this administration, and it's going to be a park need in another administration, or some other big project. Like our river development today is one that has been kind of passed off through the years. Not because we haven't looked at it. I recall a river parks study being done while I was in office as a street commissioner. But we never could get to the implementation of it. And the only effort at funding river park needs that I recall when I was in office was in 1969. We had what we called an omnibus bond issue. It was kind of a catch-all issue with 10 or 12 different funding needs, different categories of funding needs. And we had a new theater in there, and that went down. We had some river development, and it went down, as did many of our other needs of the day. But that has caused the river development, of course, to be put off until the current time, when we're finally beginning to see some particularly private needs and a minimal amount of public money available to do that development.
So you felt the needs the issues tended to recycle, and so...
Well, and I think I was beginning to get a little burnout. You know, I worked hard at what I did. I was in City Hall every work day at least 8 o'clock. My work day extended into the evening, a lot more days than not. And I just felt like there were other people who could come along and kind of pick up the ball and start serving the needs of Tulsa.
How has Tulsa changed since you were mayor?
Well, it's gotten much more complex in many ways. Particularly the change in the form of government, I think, has certainly opened up the transparency of the city functions. I think having councilors and districts where people are tuned into more specifically their own areas has been a big help. The council form has advantages in that way, and also has advantages in being able to promote and approve the big public works spending projects, because through the council districts you tend to get a unanimity of approval from not only the councilors but from the people in their districts who now feel like their district is getting the attention it needs from that particular bond issue. So that's been one of the big advantages. I'm not so sure that as far as complaints about city operations, that the public feels that they're getting as good a response as they did under the commission form. Because if you had a complaint about streets, you could call a street commissioner and you could get a direct answer, yes, up or down, on whether something could be done about that problem. The same thing existed with the water and sewer service, and with your refuse pickup, or with the police and fire problem. You had a police and fire commissioner who had some real authority over that department, and as an elected official, he would have to, of course, be expected to respond in some way to problems. So those are the differences that I see as far as the forms of government are concerned.
Right. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think that the city today has a lot more technology available to it. to deal with the things that it has. Where we had just started an information techs department, information systems department, so to speak, our use of the computer was very minimal and very fundamental. Today it's at a much higher level. Information is much more available and in better shape also to recover information. So I think there's still certain areas of the city that I think are not as well tended as they should be. Parks are one of them today. We simply have not, as a city, kept up with the quality of our city in our park system. But I think the street problems are being attended to. I was very pleased with the latest on that, and the river development also has been a great source of pleasure to me.
Great. Well, again, I'm Councilor G.T. Bynum here with our former mayor, Robert J. LaFortune, who was mayor of Tulsa from 1970 to 1978. Thank you very much.
Thank you, G.T.